What's up, metalheads? My name's Jamie. This is the Blades and EDC channel, and today we're going to take a look at a bunch of different folding knives, different lock types and non-locking knives, and all of the different types I currently have here now, and just show you guys the difference between them. And we will start out with the old school stuff first, which first up will be a slip joint. This is the Tactile Bear. It's actually spelled B-E-X-A-R, and but it's pronounced Bear. It's named after the town in Texas where these are made. And this is what your grandfather carried, a slip joint knife. You know, it's a non-locking knife. It has the walk and talk, has a spring in the back that doesn't lock the blade in place, but requires quite a bit of force to disengage the blade and to open the blade. So this is a slip joint knife, and a very good looking. This is a modern take on a slip joint knife. Case and Old Timer and some of those brands made a lot of the older ones. Some have multiple blades in them, and these are called slip joint knives, and I really like seeing these modern takes on it. So this one is called the Tactile Bear. Next up, we have another old school. This is the Backlock, which this is a newer Backlock, and you can actually flick it open like that once you practice. But this is a locking knife, and the lock is on the back here. This is another older style locking mechanism. Buck, like the Buck 110s were Backlocks, and a lot of other brands made Backlock knives. These are these are very safe knives, very, very strong lockup. And so this is the Spyderco Chaparral, the Sun and Moon version. And generally with these, they're not flickable like that. You have to open it with two hands, close it with two hands. But Spyderco's done a really good job on this one, making it where you can actually flick it out and flick it open. Very cool knife. These are some very small and thin knives generally. Same with the well, not all these. A lot of Backlocks are pretty thick, but the slip joints are generally pretty thin knives, lightweight. This lock back here by Spyderco is very thin and lightweight, and a very cool knife. Next up, we have a knife that does not lock, and this is a double detent knife. So this is a non-locking knife. What you have here is on like a liner lock or a frame lock, you will have a hole in the blade, and you'll have a detent ball on the lock that keeps the blade in place when the blade is closed. And but with this knife, you have two holes in the blade, and there's a detent in there. And basically, one of the holes is right here, holding the blade closed. And when you open it, that detent ball will fall into the other hole on the blade and hold the blade open. Although this is not a locking knife, as you can see, it's very easy to open and close this knife. This is probably the least safe knife out there in the folding knife world, because it's a very weak locking knife, very weak detent, right? It's not locking at all. It's very easy to close this, and this is one of those knives you need to be very careful with, because it can come down and get you. Keep your thumb up here on the tang of the blade. Can help protect you. Keep your finger up close, but you know, if this thing comes down, it's going to get you. So this is a double detent knife, and this is a knife that you definitely need to be careful with when using, and this is not something you would want to use hard using at all. So, and this one is called the Monterey Bay Knives EWC. Very cool little knife. Next up, we have a liner lock knife, and this knife is the Fair & Forge Stinger. And basically, you have a liner in here, a steel liner. Sometimes the liners are titanium, and if they're titanium, they'll put a steel lock bar insert on it, because you don't want titanium rubbing against a steel blade. It will start to stick. But this one has a steel liner in there. So these liners are on the inside of the scales, and this acts as your lockup right here, and you just push that over to disengage the lock. And this one has the detent, like I was talking about, the double detent. So on this liner right here, there's a little ceramic ball bearing in it, and on the blade up here, there's a little hole in the blade. So when you close this knife, that little ball falls into that hole in the blade and keeps that blade from flying out in your pocket and cutting you. When that double detent, you have two of those holes. One that it goes in when it opens instead of locking like this, and when it goes in when it closes. So this is the Fair & Forge Stinger. Very cool little thin, lightweight liner lock knife. And liner locks are pretty strong. They're not the strongest lock by any means, but pretty strong knife, or a pretty strong locking mechanism here. Very safe to use, and yeah, liner lock is probably one of the most popular locks out there. Most used locks out there, along with the next one, which is a frame lock. This one does not have liners. The actual frame itself is the lock. And you can get these where they are aluminum, or you can get them where they are steel, or you can get them where they're titanium. This one is titanium. Now, if they're aluminum or titanium, they're going to have that steel lock bar insert so that the aluminum or titanium are not making contact with the blade itself. So this one does have a steel lock bar insert. This does have a detent ball, just like the previous one. But this is going to be a little bit stronger lockup. You've got a thicker piece of metal here to hold that blade open. So compared to a lot of liner locks are pretty, the liners are pretty thin. They work great, but they're not going to be as strong as a frame lock. And this is a frame lock. This is the Wiha Knife Co. Mini Buster. Very cool liner lock. Very smooth action on liner lock, or on, excuse me, not liner lock, frame locks. A lot of times you get really smooth action on frame locks. Generally, you'll get smoother action on a liner lock, but this one's very smooth on the frame lock. And a very strong lockup with a frame lock. And yeah, but these two are the most popular two locking mechanisms on knives right now. Most knives you purchase are going to be either a liner lock or a frame lock. All right, next up we have something that was originally created by Benchmade Knives. This is called the Axis Lock. This is no longer under patent. So lots of companies are making this locking mechanism now. They call it crossbar lock, XR lock. There's all different brands. Different brands call it different things. And what you have here, you see this little pull tab right here, right? There's a spring over here and a spring over here that gives you that resistance. And when you open the blade, you can see that bar right there in between those two little tabs. That spring pushes it forward and locks that blade open. These are very, very strong. These are probably stronger than liner locks or frame locks. And when you close it, the spring pulls it back the other way and helps acts as a detent to hold that blade in the handle so it doesn't come out in your pocket. When Axis locks are done right, they are some of the smoothest action you're going to get. You just pull it back and the blade will close on you. Push it open, and it almost acts like an assisted knife, although it is not assisted. And depending on the size of the bar in here, that's going to determine how strong the lock is. And Benchmade does an excellent job. The Axis style lock or crossbar lock is one of the, if not the strongest, one of the strongest locks out there. Not the strongest, but one of the strongest locking mechanisms out there. Stronger than, I don't know if it's stronger than a lock back, but stronger than everything else you've seen here so far. And extremely smooth action. It definitely helps with the action of the knife also. And the lock is also going to affect the action of all these knives, so depending on how they're done. And you will see these by all different kinds of brands now. So for a long time, Benchmade was the only one that had these. Now their patents ran out. Everybody's making them because they're extremely popular. Next up is one that's become really popular this year, 2022, and that is the button lock. This acts completely differently than other locking mechanisms. What you have here on this on the other side of this button, you see that pin comes through there. Then there's a hollowed out piece on this side, and there's a spring in there, right, that gives you the resistance on the button. And when you push this in, as you can see, that piece of metal goes inside the scale. When it's not inside the scale and the spring is pushing it out, it is locking that blade in place where it can't come open. On the close, there's like a little cutout in the blade, a little notch, and the spring is pushing it in the other side to help hold the blade in place, right? So again, so it won't come out in your pocket. It's acting as a detent, basically a plunge detent. And these have also extremely smooth action. I don't know about the strength test of the button lock. It seems like it should be really strong when done properly. This is the Wiha Knife Coolix, by the way. And yeah, there's a lot of button locks out there nowadays. All different brands are making them. ProTech makes some of the best button locks in my opinion, but I don't have any of those here at the moment. And yeah, if you want to know more about button locks, I got some videos about button locks and how to disassemble them. And sometimes you get a button lock, you can't get a button stick when you first get it. The button feels like it wants to stick. I got a couple videos out there showing how to remedy that, and it'll break in over time on its own and not do that. But if you just want to make it faster, I got a video showing you how to do that. But button locks have become extremely popular. They're very fun to fidget with. They generally provide really good action when they're done right. Some companies don't do them right though, so some of them are definitely better than others. This one's pretty good, but ProTech makes the best button locks in my opinion. So that is your button lock knife. Next up is one of my favorite locking mechanisms, probably my favorite locking mechanism, and the only company that I know of that makes these is Spyderco, and that is the compression lock. Now this is very similar to a liner lock, right? On a liner lock, the liner comes over on the underside of the knife against the blade and locks it open. Well, on Spyderco's compression lock, what they've done, which enables you to keep your fingers completely out of the path of the blade, is they've got a liner their liner is coming up here at the top and hitting the blade and locking it open. So, and it provides extremely smooth action, right? When you disengage that lock, watch this blade. It just drops completely closed. Spyderco, or the compression lock, is it probably is my favorite locking mechanism. And I don't know of any other companies that make a compression lock. I don't know if Spyderco still has the patent on it, but if you watch right there, see how that pops out? When the blade opens, gets fully open, it allows that little compression lock to pop out. And there's not a spring in there, it's just the bend in the metal. The bend in the metal they did when they originally built it. The blade is holding it back right there, right? And as soon as it clears and the blade is no longer on it, it just pops out. Boom, and it locks up really, really solid. And obviously, as you can see, makes the very easy to open and close the knife, and your fingers are not in the way at all when you disengage the lock, right? Fingers, you don't have to worry about getting cut. Same with the button lock, you don't have to worry about getting cut. Same with the axis lock. But with a frame lock, you got to have your thumb in the way, in the path of the blade. Same with the liner lock. And you can do a backlock without that if you do it right, but generally you are going to have your fingers in the way of the blade to engage the lock or disengage the lock. So cool thing about the button lock, axis lock, and compression lock is your fingers are not in the path of the blade when you are disengaging that locking mechanism. So makes them more safe in my opinion, and also more fidget friendly if you like to play with your knives and fidget with them. Next up we have, this is a little different. This is actually a folding automatic knife, right? This is the Kershaw Launch 11, and there are springs in there that fire that. This works just like a button lock, except there are springs in there that deploy the blade. Instead of you having to flick the blade out when you fold that knife over, that spring is having tension put on it, and this plunge lock or button lock is coming out to help hold the blade closed. And when you press this button, if you watch right there, make sure I'm not going to hit any knives, it lets that blade move, and that spring just fires the blade out. And then when you let off the button, that little plunge comes back out and locks the blade open. So it works just like a button lock pretty much, but it is an automatic knife, which just fires out when you hit the button. So, and you got to press the button back in to close the lock. So it works just like a button lock, but it's an automatic knife. So I just wanted to throw that one in there because it's really no different than that. But it's an auto. So next up, we have a Bolster Lock. This is the Devo Knives Stout, and what you see here, very similar to a liner lock or a frame lock, but the difference being that, you know, see how this scale's on the outside here, and the lock is over here. There's no scale over top of it. The scale acts as the overstop travel, so you can't bend the lock too far that way. And bolster locks are generally very, very smooth. They're also extremely safe and work exactly the same as a liner lock or a frame lock, like I said. But the only part of the lock that's exposed is the bolster area here, right? This scale is covering the rest of the lock, so you don't have to worry about. So where with a frame lock, sometimes when you're deploying the blade, with some knives, frame locks, if you get your fingers touching the blade doesn't want to come out. This one isn't one of those, but a lot of them are very sensitive, so if your fingers even touching that lock bar, the blade will not want to deploy. Bolster locks eliminate that problem by covering over all that. So, and the only part that is exposed is the part where you put your thumb, to where the frame lock, the entire thing is exposed all the way down. So it works just like a frame lock or a liner lock though, and becoming more and more popular, bolster locks. they're generally very smooth action in my experience, and I'm a big fan of Bolster Locks. So, all right, last but certainly not least, this is a newer locking mechanism. This is the Dimco Knives AD 20.5, and this has what is called the Shark Lock. Basically what you have in here, this is your lock right here, right? Inside here there's a spring, and when you pull this back, if you look, it's hard to, I'm not going to be able to show you this, but on the underneath of this, there's like a little place, a notch where it catches the notch in the blade and locks it open. And also helps to hold it closed. So as you can see right there, that spring is pulling that blade closed by this piece right here. Same with the open. When you open this knife, when it gets to a certain point, it just pulls the blade the rest of the way, you see? But at the same time, it's not being designed to do that. It's doing that because of how the lock works. This piece right here is your lock. And it kind of, no way for me to really show you this without, I do have a disassembly of this knife on my YouTube channel if you want to see how it actually works. Unfortunately with this knife you can't see the locking mechanism while the knife is assembled. So underneath there is where what is making contact with the blade on the close and on the open, and it's an extremely strong locking mechanism. It locks up very, very strong. One of the strongest, if not the strongest, you see here. I can't say 100% it's the strongest, but out of all these knives here, this one may be the strongest locking knife here on the table. And it also provides excellent action with the way it's done. So because of how it seems like it's assisted, you just pull that back and you can see the blade will just close on its own. Just push it open, and once the blade hits a certain point, it will keep going, and makes it extremely easy to deploy the blade and close the blade. Also makes it fun to play with. This one has been modified, of course. I've put some fat carbon scales on it, so they don't come like this. You can get them in different colored Gribery scales, or they have titanium scales, all different kinds of stuff you can do with them. So, and there are a lot of aftermarket parts for it. So, yeah, that's the Dimco AD 20.5, and this is the Shark Lock. And there's also a lock called the Snex Lock, which is very similar to the Shark Lock, and there's a couple other ones out there that I do not have here to show you, but yeah, those are the ones, all the locking folding knives and unlocking folding knives. These two here do not lock, so this is a slip joint and this is a double detent. These two do not lock, but the rest of these are all locking knives, and yeah, those are what I have here to show you. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you're new, consider subscribing, and I will see you guys on the next one.